I am Lina Cuartas. I help with Disastershock social media and in every way I can. And I'm going to start a series of interviews with our Disastershock global response team members because they are extraordinary individuals. And this week we are starting with Toni Nemia. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Very close, Lina. It's Nemia.
Nemia, okay, like in Spanish. I didn't dare go there. And I love your full name, Antoinette.
Yes, if someone were to call me Antoinette, I wouldn't even turn my head because it's only a name on my birth certificate.
Oh.
Everybody calls me Toni.
Okay, it's a beautiful name either way.
Thank you.
Toni, where are you from? I have no idea. I know you live in San Francisco, but I don't know where you're from.
I was born in San Francisco in 1947.
Wow.
And I am not very well traveled at all. My personal and professional life have always centered here in the city.
Wow. So you're a San Francisco devotee.
Yes. And I must tell you, in the 75 years that I've been here, our city has changed dramatically.
Yes. My son just moved there very recently, and he was shocked by that realization.
Yes. It's a beautiful city on the one hand, and the degree of poverty, homelessness, problematic use of drugs keeps people on the street as if this were a war zone. There are tents pitched everywhere. People are overdosing.
Wow.
There's some thought that we all will have to start carrying Narcan.
Wow.
In order to bring people
back. Able to assist?
Yes. And yet, I don't want to leave. There's no place to go. So that's the current condition.
Wow. And that kind of dives right into my first question. I was going to ask you, what fuels your heart? Because the little I've heard from you, the presentation that you made on ACEs, I read The Deepest Well, and I already knew about ACEs, and the emotion with which you talked about early childhood trauma and how it affects people for life. I saw how deep your heart was. So just tell me a little about your heart and what you do, because I think there doesn't seem to be much difference between your profession and your human heart.
You're absolutely right. I'm currently the executive director for the Center for Child and Family Development, school-based family counseling. And our mission is to provide direct service to students and families in under-resourced and underserved schools.
Wow.
So the number of hours per week that goes into this position allows me to blur my personal and my professional identity. I'm not sure that I can separate those at this point.
Wow. Do you work with a team?
Right now, we have a cohort of 25 trainees and associates. These are graduate students who are working toward licensing in the state of California. They need to earn 3,000 supervised hours.
Wow.
So we're a starting point for them. We have to make sure that we match up with their university requirements. We also have to make sure that we match up with the governing board in the state of California. And although we're not a micromanaging group, we operate on the premise that everything we do in schools counts towards those 3,000 hours. In some ways, we're a little bit like milieu treatment.
Okay. Wow. Do you have to personally visit schools?
Pre-pandemic, yes. The pandemic really upended so much in terms of in-person work. As of this year, all of our trainees are in person at the school sites.
Mm-hmm.
However, supervision, both individual and group, is done remotely. And the reason I think we're going to stick with that method of communication is because more and more of our trainees are coming from geographic areas in California that are not even close to San Francisco.
Wow.
So in order to keep the cohort up and running, we can't just rely on folks from San Francisco. We're also in the East Bay, and we're straddling that bridge.
That's huge territory.
Yes.
Wow. Wow. So in fact, the pandemic, in a way, forced you into a better operational model.
Exactly.
Wow. Isn't that humbling how this
Yes.
catastrophe has pushed us to evolve in so many ways?
Yes, we were kicking and screaming about not wanting to be remote. But when the choice came to providing nothing, as opposed to keeping the program alive and meeting the needs of students and families, there was no choice.
Wow. So you're constantly in touch with lives that need constant support and relief and help.
Yes.
How do you take care of yourself? What's your joy? What's your peace?
Well, I think you can hear some tweeting.
Yes, I recognize them.
In the background.
Uh-huh.
So once my husband and I experienced the empty nest,
Uh-huh.
I
Oh,
started to fill the house with animals. I have 2 dogs, 1 cat, and 2 birds.
wow.
And it's a kind of peaceable kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
So that is just comforting.
Uh-huh.
Day in, day out. They're very present.
They are your refuge.
Exactly. I also have a passion for doing a form of needlepoint.
Uh-huh.
It's called micro pettipoint.
Wow.
So I'm a stitcher, and I use a magnifying lamp with a light in it. I use sometimes 2 pairs of glasses.
Wow.
And I stitch on silk gauze.
Wow.
And they end up being pretty little pictures. They often look like oil paintings. I'm a great technician.
Uh-huh.
I'm an artist.
Wow. See, if I had stuck to my questions, I probably would have not found that out. I also work with a magnifying lens, and I paint rocks. I find rocks and I see things in the rocks and in acorns. So I create motherhoods and pietas, and I find faces. And so we have a passion for the little things.
Very much. I have to confess that I just joined a Facebook group.
Uh-huh.
It's centered around people who have more than an interest in miniatures.
Uh-huh.
And so the rock paintings I've seen. I've also seen sculptures on grains of rice.
Wow, I have to learn about that group, because I always little things just seduce me. I think there's so much beauty that people just walk over. And it opens you to people and situations that also get neglected and discarded.
Yes. I don't equate some of the relationships that have established with true friendship, because we don't get to see each other in person, but something about sharing an interest
Yes.
is really great for a connection.
Yes, yes. And I think it's so important to your hands. Working with our hands is so therapeutic. And
I like to think of it as my healthy, obsessive compulsive.
yes, I identify with that too. I have rocks everywhere waiting to be released.
Well, people who do needlework will talk about their stash.
Uh-huh.
They're not talking about drugs, but they're talking about chest of drawers,
Yes.
where everything is filled with threads. In my case, it's silk thread,
Uh-huh.
an enormous amount of needles because I'm constantly losing them,
Yes.
and silk gauze, which is the medium that I actually stitch on.
It's your canvas. And who did you learn this passion from?
Actually, my grandmother on my father's side was an avid needle arts person, crochet and knitting primarily. And then a neighbor actually taught me more knitting and then embroidery. Embroidery then evolved into needlepoint, and I had seen a very large canvas that was a tapestry of the lady and the unicorn.
Uh-huh.
I didn't do that one, but it motivated me to then start in on many canvases and stitch my life away.
Wow, it is so fascinating, because I think it's when you go deeper into someone's passions, there are treasures to be found.
Yes.
Yes, I used to embroider as a child, but then I left it because I paint and I draw and I sketch, and I did it on paper and canvas for so long, but now rocks are my beloved medium because they're everywhere and they're free.
Yes. Well, one of the complications of my healthy obsession is that I have much more thread that I can ever begin to use, but it never stops me from seeing a particular color that I just have to have.
Yes, I am the same way about paints and paintbrushes. I've never done, and going into an art store was very dangerous. So now, thank God, I can order online.
The same is true for me.
Yes. Oh, Toni, I would love for us to trade. I'll send you one of my jams and you can send me one of yours.
What fun that would be.
Wow. Well, my big question, how did you find yourself in the Disastershock group? What brought you here?
Well, the glue is Dr. Brian Gerard.
Hmm.
He wears many hats in the name of service. Interestingly enough, I was doing school-based work in the mid-1980s. And that was when the center started, through Dr. Gerard's work at the University of San Francisco. I was establishing a K-12 school-based program at 3 geographically close schools. And I quoted Dr. Gerard and also the Yale Child Study Unit in a grant that I wrote to the district, hoping for funding. Well, they didn't fund me. That was that. but somehow we kept on.
Uh-huh.
And lo and behold, I thought I was going to retire from the San Francisco Unified School District after 40 years.
Wow.
That did not work. I didn't want to retire.
Uh-huh.
And I became interested in being an individual clinical supervisor for the Center for Child and Family Development. That evolved into my being the executive director. And Dr. Gerard offered to mentor me. And I believe that is an act of courage on his part. I'm not sure how well I take to all his direction,
Uh-huh.
but the kind of intellectual chemistry and curiosity that we have about the work makes for a great relationship. And he invited me to Disastershock.
Wow.
More recently, I've become a little more connected to Disastershock through our work with the nation of the Ukraine.
Uh-huh.
The war is
Ravaging.
taking lives, ravaging people. So I'm going to be giving a talk probably in April, known as a Toloka. And these talks will include about 1,000 Ukrainian people,
Uh-huh.
mostly teachers, but certainly parents and therapists, in a discussion about resilience,
Uh-huh.
trauma-informed work.
Wow.
I talked with the leader of Camp Ed Ukraine,
Uh-huh.
and we share something in common. My grandmother was a Ukrainian Jew,
Wow.
and
You have a blood tie to the country.
she escaped over the border in a haystack. I've since learned that many people did escape, hidden in haystacks, and her job was to hang on to 2 very small diamond rings. Her mother's instructions were, whatever happens, don't lose these rings, because when we get to the United States, we can sell them for
That was
food.
the capital. Wow.
So that connection of late has sort of reinvigorated me. It also, the idea of disaster shock, I think, reduces isolation
Uh-huh.
and really keeps us aware that we are a global community, and that we live in bubbles.
Absolutely. And that was my last question. I wanted to know who your tribe was. Who are your people? Because I think with this work we do, it is so important to have a community. And that's what keeps me coming back to Disastershock. It's the amount of human concern and the desire to help. It feeds my soul every time we meet.
Well, one of the things I've discovered is that I am an American, even though there is so much that I disagree in terms of our government and how people in this country are treated. So looking outward, I was also able to get in touch with my roots, apropos of my mother's mother coming from Odessa. I'm kind of an ethnic mutt, to quote Barack Obama.
Uh-huh.
My father's people actually were originally from Eastern Africa,
Oh.
the Middle East, and here we all are.
Yes, yes, definitely, because I think we all are hybrids.
Yes.
There's no such purity.
And being among difference is really enriching.
Yes. And it's so humbling when you are reminded of our common humanity. We all want the basic things that are common. We want to feel safe, we want to be seen, we want to be loved. And you realize you can help in that respect if you just keep your heart open.
Yes. I bring some of this work to the center, even though it feels, I think, for many of our trainees, very big and very far away.
Mm-hmm.
But they're becoming increasingly aware of how important to mental health a society of collaboration is, where collateral relationships dominate as opposed to individual orientation. And I think it helps them in their work because they are also working with groups of students and families who are coming from non-American backgrounds.
Correct. Yes, and I think that's the history of the world. it's we're never really gonna stop migration. Humans always want to move wherever opportunity or a different beginning is offered. And there's that constant preoccupation that
Yes.
that maybe the immigrant is taking opportunities that are ours, but it's this fabric of this country is so enriched, and that's why I'm here. I'm from Colombia.
Yes.
Every new person, every new history adds to our diversity and to our worth, and it just keeps, it blows my mind when I hear, I'm studying memoir right now, and when you hear the stories of different cultures and why people leave their land and their everything that they love, and they follow their heart to find a solution, and it's that story is what brings us both here.
I have to say that my involvement with Disastershock is clearly selfish. And the reason I say that is because I then get to be surrounded with people who share my views. And I don't have to fight to offer a different perspective. And the numbers of people in Disastershock around the world are plentiful. So being a part of that community really enriches and enlarges my life.
Wow. And you look extraordinary. I wish you health and well-being. And I'm fascinated about learning about your passions and the clarity of purpose that you hold, that you walked away from a retirement where you could be traveling the world, and you have chosen to follow your heart and continue to serve.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Lena.
Thank you so much, Toni. I hope we stay in touch. I'm gonna stop recording. Yes.